Every gilded cage is built with walls of comfort. The only question is what you're paying for them.
On September 10th, 2025, a single gunshot rings out. And just like that, one of the loudest, most controversial voices in American politics was silenced. But Charlie Kirk's death was really just the beginning of the story. The official narrative, a lone gunman, almost immediately started to unravel into this chaotic mess of conflicting evidence, forensic debates, and some really dark conspiracy theories. So today, we're going to unpack how one single violent moment managed to expose a whole nation's crisis of trust. I mean, just think about that for a second. The setting is a stage at a university. He's literally giving a speech about gun violence. And in this moment of just chilling, unbelievable irony, the last word he ever says is violence. One shot, and a major public figure is executed in broad daylight. You know, that one moment, captured on dozens of phones, it didn't just kick off a murder investigation, it ignited this national firestorm over what is even real anymore. Okay, so before we dive headfirst down the rabbit hole, and believe me, we are going there, we have to lay out the official story first. This is the narrative that the FBI and local police put together. It's the foundation that everything else is either trying to support or tear down. All right, so here's the official timeline. It paints a picture of a really efficient, kind of terrifying attack. Right before noon, the shooter gets into position on a roof. During the speech, boom, one shot is fired. The shooter then jumps down, melts into a nearby neighborhood, and disappears. Meanwhile, on the ground, it's total chaos. Kirk gets rushed to a hospital in a private car, but it was already too late. The manhunt for the shooter, well, it didn't last very long. Investigators zeroed in on this 22-year-old Tyler James Robinson. And on paper, the case against him looked absolutely airtight. I mean, look at this. They had his DNA on the rifle. They had a ballistics match confirming it was the murder weapon. They had text messages that look a whole lot like a confession. And to top it all off, they even found a note basically spelling out his plan. For the FBI, this was a slam dunk. Case closed. But the big question is always why? What was the motive? Well, according to authorities, Robinson was kind of at war with his own conservative family. He had recently started leaning more to the left, getting into things like pro-trans rights, and he apparently told his family that he thought Kirk was full of hate. So in the FBI's version of events, it's a pretty clear-cut case of political radicalization that boiled over into violence. Okay, so that's the neat and tidy official story. But it didn't stay that way for long. Almost immediately, the whole thing started to fray around the edges. And the first people poking holes in it weren't, shadowy figures in basements. They were super detail-oriented people online who started pointing out that the physical evidence, it just didn't seem to add up. This is where the whole case starts to crack. And it really all boils down to this one absolutely massive question. Where did the shot come from? Because the entire official case is built on the idea that the shooter was on that rooftop in front of Charlie Kirk. If that's not true, if the bullet came from somewhere else, then the whole lone gunman theory just completely falls apart. So here's the central conflict right here. The FBI says shot came from the front. But then you have all these online analysts who are slowing down the cell phone footage, zooming in, and they're saying, no way. They argue that what you can actually see is an entry wound in his back right shoulder. And they point to the blood splatter, which seems to go forward, something you'd expect from a shot from behind. And then the whole thing about the bullet itself gets even weirder. A spokesperson for Kirk's own organization, TPUSA, came out and said a surgeon told him the bullet never actually exited Kirk's body, that it just fragmented inside him. But a lot of ballistics experts immediately pushed back on that. They said a powerful round like a .30-06 would almost certainly go clean through. Then again, bullets can do very strange things when they hit bone, so it just adds another thick layer of fog to everything. Then you've got the weapon. The official story asks us to believe that this amateur kid, Tyler Robinson, made an incredibly difficult shot from almost 200 yards away under immense pressure with a vintage Mauser rifle. Well, skeptics point out that this rifle isn't exactly a modern sniper rifle. They argue that making a precise neck shot like that at that distance would take the skill of a highly trained sniper or just a 1 in a million lucky shot. But maybe nothing, and I mean nothing, fueled more suspicion than this one moment, which the internet quickly nicknamed Cameragate. Right after the shot, in all the chaos, this footage shows a man in a white hat just calmly walking up to a camera that was positioned right above where Kirk was sitting. He takes it down, and then he appears to remove the SD card. So, was this just some guy panicking? Or was this someone deliberately removing the one piece of evidence that could have shown everyone exactly what happened? So, with the forensic evidence being so heavily debated, you get this huge vacuum of certainty. And as we all know, the internet absolutely hates a vacuum. So, into that void rushed this massive flood of alternative theories, every single one looking at the same set of facts through a totally different lens of suspicion and conspiracy. And these theories, they pretty much fall into a few big buckets. First, you've got theories of foreign involvement, usually pointing the finger at Mossad. The idea is that Kirk was silenced because he was getting too critical of Israeli policy, especially around the whole Jeffrey Epstein saga. Then you have the domestic, deep state, or false flag theories. And finally, the idea that connects almost all of them, that Tyler Robinson wasn't the killer at all, but was just a patsy, a pawn in a much bigger chess game. That foreign involvement theory really got a huge boost from conservative figures like Candace Owens. She publicly claimed that Kirk was in the middle of a fight with some incredibly powerful pro-Israel billionaires right before he was killed. The implication was pretty clear. This was a hit job to shut him up. But hey, this suspicion was not a one-way street. Not at all. A tweet from the filmmaker Morgan J. Freeman went totally viral, floating this pretty explosive idea. What if Trump himself ordered the hit? To create a distraction or to stir up chaos? Now, that's a wild theory for sure, but the fact that it got so much traction shows you just how deep the distrust of leaders and institutions runs across the entire political map. And just when you thought things couldn't get any weirder, oh, they do. Enter the Snake Eyes Connection. Yep, the 1998 Nicolas Cage movie. The plot of that film involves an assassination at a big public event. And for some theorists, this wasn't just a bizarre coincidence. No, they saw it as a form of predictive programming or maybe even a ritualistic blueprint for the real-life attack. So let's pull back from the theories for a minute and look at the real-world impact of all this. Because beyond the online debates, this assassination sent a political earthquake rumbling through the entire country, and it exposed some really deep, really volatile fault lines in our society. And the immediate reaction online was, well, for a lot of people, it was just horrifying. Instead of everyone condemning a public murder, huge swaths of social media were flooded with cheers, with celebratory memes, with people expressing pure joy that a political opponent had been killed. It was this really shocking moment that revealed a level of dehumanization and polarization that's hard to look at. And of course, the political weaponization was instant. Before a suspect was even identified, President Trump was already out there blaming the radical left. The assassination wasn't treated as a crime to be solved, it was immediately framed as a political act, an inevitable result of his opponent's rhetoric. And you gotta understand, Kirk's impact was huge, built on this insane meteoric rise. He went from a high school kid writing for Breitbart to founding Turning Point USA at just 18 years old. Now, he didn't do it alone. He got big seed money from major Republican donors like Foster Friess and built this conservative youth empire from the ground up. And that made him an absolute hero to his followers and a massive target for his enemies. You know, agencies like the Secret Service have been studying attacks on public figures for decades, and their research shows this really important pattern. Attackers very rarely call in a direct threat, but what they do show, almost always, are what they call warning behaviors, a clear pathway that leads to violence. It suggests that political violence isn't just a sudden snap, it's often the last step in a process that we might actually be able to see coming. And so that's where this whole thing leaves us. The assassination of Charlie Kirk wasn't just about the death of one man. It was a flashpoint. It exposed this massive crisis of trust we have in our institutions, in the media, and frankly, in each other. When every piece of evidence can be spun into a conspiracy, it forces all of us to ask this really difficult question. In an era of such deep mistrust, how can we as a society ever hope to agree on what the truth is?